and play on 2nd and 10. That's his youth right there.
Tagovailoa trying to make up for it. Fires to the end zone. Touchdown! Alabama wins!
So today I'll be continuing with my college football game-by-game prediction and roster preview videos with the Michigan Wolverines. Michigan returns 63% of their production, which is a whole lot to be getting back with them making a coaching change. And they had the 11th ranked recruiting class, which is really good also for there to have been a coaching change, getting commitments from 2 5-star and 10 4-star players. Offensively, Michigan averaged only 26.1 points per game last season, and while am almost certain they'll be better than that this year, how much better will depend on how far Bryce Underwood can take them. So last season, Underwood started all 13 games for them at quarterback and had only 2,428 yards and completed 60.3% of his passes, which is okay but not great, and had a 7.2 yards per throw average, which is okay but not great. And his touchdown to interception ratio was terrible, though. It was only 11-9. Now he does have some dual threatness too. He ran 88 times for 392 and 6 touchdowns, averaging 4.5 yards per carry. But Underwood last year didn't even have a quarterbacks coach, and this year Whittingham's offensive coordinator that he brought with him from Utah, Jason Beck, will also be the quarterbacks coach. So for that reason, I'm almost 100% certain that Underwood will be some form of better than he was in 2025. But for me to say he's going to play to his 5-star rating, I will have to see some of it first. And at wide receiver, Michigan is not great. They do get Andrew Marsh back, though, who was their best wide receiver last season, catching 45 passes for 651 and 4 touchdowns, averaging 14.5 a catch. He was a freshman All-American last season.
Listen in the backfield. Underwood winds up deep, top right.
And at running back, Justice Haynes, who transferred out, was Michigan's best player last season, even though he only played in 7 games, I think it was. But they do have Jordan Marshall coming back, who played in 11 games, and he's close to as good as Justice Haynes is. He had 932 and 10 touchdowns on 150 carries, averaging 6.2 a carry. The question will be, can they have a running back number 2 this year that is close to as good as Jordan Marshall was last year for Justice Haynes? And then offensive line is going to be one of the best in the country because it was really good last year. They averaged 210.2 rushing yards per game and 5.4 yards per run and only gave up 21 sacks, and they've got 4 starters coming back, and Kyle Whittingham brings his offensive line coach from Utah with him. Jim Harding's his name. He's was Utah's offensive line coach for the past 12 years, and there's not an offensive line coach in the country that's better than him to me. So they get Jake Garnera back at center, who only allowed 2 sacks and 11 total pressures last season. And they get back at left guard Evan Link, who's a third-year starter for them, who only played in 7 games last year because of a season-ending injury, but he only allowed in that 1 sack and 8 total quarterback pressures. And they get both starting tackles back, Blake Frazier and Andrew Sprague. So Frazier only allowed 4 sacks and 15 total pressures, and Sprague only allowed 1 sack and 4 total pressures. And then on the defensive side, so it took new Michigan defensive coordinator Jay Hill until his second season at BYU to have a good defense. But that won't be the case at Michigan because he'll have so much more talent to work with than he had at BYU. And Michigan even had a good defense in the Sharon Moore years. They only gave up 19.2 points per game on average last season, and I expect that to be a little better this year. So on the defensive line, they gave up on average only 111.9 rushing yards per game last season, and I do think that could get a little worse. So they do have Trey Pierce coming back, but he was mainly just used as a run stopper, not a pass rusher. He had 30 tackles, and Whittingham brings in John Henry Daly from Utah, who was in my top 10 transfers video. He's an elite pass rusher. But Michigan loses Derek Moore, who was their best pass rusher a year ago. And then at linebacker, Michigan is never short of talent at the linebacker position, but what they don't have hardly any of this year there is experience. So the secondary, though, I'm very high on. They gave up on average 211.4 passing yards per game a year ago, but I think they're going to be a lot better than that this year. I think this is probably the Big Ten's best secondary. So at cornerback, they get back Zeke Berry and Jahray Hill. So Berry's a third-year starter for Michigan at corner, and he missed 2 games last year because of an injury, but in the 11 games he played in, he had 33 tackles and a interception and 10 pass breakups. And Hill is also a third-year starter for them at corner, and he had last year 36 tackles, a sack, a forced fumble, an interception, and 5 pass breakups. And they bring in Smith Snowden from Utah, who I think is probably the best cornerback of all three. He was in my top 10 transfers video. And then they're really good at safety too, with Rod Moore coming back, who's not played much since the 2023 national title season. In 2024, he didn't play at all, and in 2025, only in 3 games. This has been because of an injury, but he is really good. Before getting hurt, he was a 2-year starter for Michigan at safety, and in 26 games, had a total of 109 tackles and 6 interceptions and 6 pass breakups. And they bring in Chris Bracey from Memphis, a very good safety, who had last year 81 tackles and 9 pass breakups and an interception and a forced fumble. So now for the game-by-game predictions, starting with Western Michigan. This will pretty much be a name-your-score game for Michigan. They'll be able to play second stringers the whole second half of it. But then comes the first big home game of the Kyle Whittingham era against Oklahoma. So for Michigan to have any chance in this one, Bryce Underwood is going to have to play a lot better than he did against Oklahoma last year. Last year he looked every bit of being fresh out of high school, and I think he'll play a little better than he did last year, but I still think that John Matera is going to be able to make a few plays with his arms and legs that Underwood won't be able to make. And defensively, Michigan has, I think, a little better secondary than Oklahoma, but Oklahoma, I think, has quite a bit better of a front seven. So I think Oklahoma does have the overall advantage over Michigan defensively, and Michigan's going to be a really good running team again, but like last year, hardly any one is going to be able to run on Oklahoma much at all, if anyone is even able to, and I think that will include Michigan in that. So I do think it'll be a very close, low-scoring game, but I think Oklahoma gets the win. And then UTEP, that'll pretty much be a name your score kind of game for Michigan, where they'll play second stringers the whole second half. So now Iowa. So I think this will be a pretty close, low-scoring game because Iowa always has one of college football's best defenses. But I do expect Michigan to win this game because Iowa also never has much of an offense because their passing game is always even worse than Michigan's was last year with Underwood. And while Iowa usually can run the football some, I do expect Michigan to be better than them at that, especially at this point in the season because their offensive line is more experienced. So now on the road at Minnesota. So Minnesota's going to be a decent team. They've got a whole lot coming back, and they like to play the same style of football as Michigan, where they run the football, control the clock, and try to play good defense. And I'm pretty sure that's what they'll try to do in this game. Except the problem for Minnesota is they're like a much less talented version of Michigan, and they've not got the players that they need, especially not at the line of scrimmage to be able to handle Michigan. So Michigan, I'm pretty sure, will get this win by at least 2 touchdowns. So now Penn State. So I think this will be a close, kind of lower scoring game. But I do see several reasons to pick Michigan in this game. One of them being they get an extra week to prepare, and another being I do like the Kyle Whittingham hire at Michigan a little bit more than I do the Matt Campbell hire at Penn State. And another one being I think Michigan does have the better players at the line of scrimmage, especially on the offensive side. And they also have home field advantage. So I'm going with Michigan. So now Indiana. So as much as I like Whittingham and his staff at Michigan, Cincinnati and his staff at Indiana is even better. And no one's going to be able to run hardly any on Indiana this year. Again, I think to beat Indiana, I think you're going to have to air it out. And that's just not Michigan's game. Now, I do think Michigan's defense and home crowd will be able to make this game close by slowing down Indiana's offense some, but I do have to go with Indiana to get this win. So on the road at Rutgers, so this is a game to where even if Bryce Underwood somehow wasn't one bit better than he was last year, it won't matter at all because Michigan can just lean on their offensive line and their defense to get them this win. Rutgers doesn't stand a chance at being able to stop Michigan's run game. So I think Michigan gets this win by 20 something points. So now Michigan State in the rivalry game, although it's probably not going to be much of a rivalry game this year because Michigan State I think is going to be one of the worst Power 4 teams. But the only spots on the roster where Michigan State might be able to match up with Michigan would be quarterback because their quarterback, Eliso Milivojevic, did play a little bit better last season than Bryce Underwood did, and at linebacker because Michigan State does have Jordan Hall, and Michigan did lose all their good linebackers from last season. But there's nowhere on the coaching staff where Michigan State can come close to matching up with Michigan. And Michigan State's quarterback will have even less weapons to throw to at wide receiver than Underwood will, because at least Underwood will have Andrew Marsh, while Milivojevic will have nine. And Michigan State, if I were to grade their secondaries, I'd give Michigan's an A plus and Michigan State's an F. And Michigan, they'll control the line of scrimmage on both sides in this game and get the win in a blowout. So now on the road at Oregon. So Michigan's offensive line, I think, is probably better than Oregon's because of all the experience they have coming back there, but it won't be much better. And Oregon, I think, has the better defense than Michigan because I think their front seven is quite a bit better than Michigan's. And Oregon doesn't really have a running back that's better than Michigan's Jordan Marshall, but they've got two running backs, Jordan Davison and Dyer Hill, that are both about as good as Jordan Marshall is. And even if Bryce Underwood improves a whole lot, which I'm doubtful of, I don't think he has enough weapons to throw to be able to beat Oregon. I think, especially with this game being at Oregon, that Oregon wins this game by about 10 points. So now UCLA. So you probably know by now that UCLA's hiring of James Madison coach Bob Chesney is one of my favorite coaching hires this year, except not quite as much as the Michigan hiring of Kyle Whittingham. And Nico, I'm about to leave you. At UCLA was even worse last year than Bryce Underwood was at Michigan. Now, like I said with Underwood at Michigan, the same goes for Nico. I'm about to leave you at UCLA with a much better coach coming in. He should improve some, but not even Josh Heupel, who's considered an offensive expert, was able to get a lot out of him. And Whittingham will have the better players at the line of scrimmage than Chesney will at UCLA, especially on the offensive side. So with that, and Michigan also having home field advantage, well, I think this will be a pretty close game. It's hard for me to imagine Michigan losing it. So now the big rivalry game on the road at Ohio State. So when I said Michigan has, I think, the best secondary in the Big Ten, Ohio State's is not far behind theirs, and Ohio State does have the much better quarterback and the much better wide receivers than Michigan does. Now, is the better running back between Bo Jackson at Ohio State and Jordan Marshall at Michigan is debatable, as well as who has the better offensive line of the two teams. But Ohio State does, I think, have the better front at seven than Michigan does. And I do think this game will be close, and anything can happen in this rivalry, except Ohio State is one team where Michigan, I don't think, will have a coaching advantage over. And I think that, especially with this game being on the road, Ohio State beats Michigan again. So my final prediction for Michigan in 2026 is 8-4 overall and 6-3 in the conference. And I know you're probably thinking, well, that's worse than last year with Sharon Moore, and Kyle Whittingham is supposed to be a big upgrade over him, but it's because of how much tougher the schedule is this year than it was last year. Whittingham, I expect to stay at Michigan for at least 3 years, but I don't expect him to stay past his 5-year contract. But I think 2027 will be the first year that he'll be able to make a serious run at a national title with Michigan. Now, if he could have gotten his quarterback from Utah, Devin Dampier, to come with him to Michigan, I think he probably could have made a run this year. But that'll be it with this video. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.